When a deal comes to be struck between the industrial and the residential customer representatives, it's the small businesses that are left on the floor.
I'm Carolyn Pars, communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a clean energy future without leaving anyone behind. Join me as we explore the technologies, policies, and human stories that can make clean energy not just sustainable for our planet, but accessible for everyone. When electricity bills go up, most people assume it's just the cost of energy. But what if the real story is happening somewhere else, like in rate design, or infrastructure decisions, or regulatory processes that most people never see or even hear about? Welcome to Just Power. I'm Carolyn Pars, and this is our series Leading Through Energy Affordability, where we're asking a deeper question. What do credible responses to this moment actually look like? And today, we're going under the hood. I have with me John Wilson. He's the Vice President of Grid Strategies and a regulatory expert with nearly 2 decades of experience working across more than 70 utility proceedings in the U.S. and Canada. And he often represents the other side of the fence, such as consumer advocates and environmental organizations and public interest groups. He's that person who spends his time in the rooms where some of the most consequential and least visible decisions are being debated, challenged, and ultimately shaped. So glad to have you on with us, John.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's great to be with you.
All right. So you're sitting inside these proceedings, right, across the country, seeing how decisions are actually being made. From your perspective, what's really driving the affordability pressures that we're having right now? And how much of that is visible to the public?
Wow. Well, it depends on where you live, what's driving the affordability crisis. It's kind of an incredible coincidence. Most of the country is seeing energy prices going up at rates that we haven't seen go up in a while. But the reasons really differ by location. So, for example, I used to have a couple of clients in California, not currently working there right now, but wildfire costs related to building the system that could not start wildfires and also would help customers ride through them even if they weren't directly impacted. Those costs are really, really high. Storm recovery costs on the East Coast from hurricanes and that sort of thing. And then really we're just seeing that the grid is aging. So we built this huge grid out in the late 50s through the early 70s when we had so much electric demand growth. All that stuff was bright, shiny, new back then. Well, now it's, 50 years old plus, sometimes 60 or 70. And a lot of those things have not been replaced or only partially replaced. So that is also driving a lot of the costs. Lots of other things too I could talk about. What can I get into in detail?
Yeah, well, we're going to get into some of the things up. We had a prep call before we met today. And one of the things that struck me with that is this whole idea of the large loads that are happening, right? And I know you've been asked this question a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But what I want to say is this. I want to start here. Parts of this rate design that we see, right, you have said tend to favor large customers, right? But yet, at the same time, I often hear utilities argue that large commercial and industrial customers often carry a significant share of the costs for residential customers, right? It's like, okay, so when you look at the data and the cases that you've worked on, what's actually true?
What I see in the data is that in general, the larger customers tend to get a better deal on electricity prices. Generally the worst off, and it varies again by location, but generally the folks who get it worse are the small businesses. They have the least power in the process. They tend to not be closely represented by anyone. And so when a deal comes to be struck between the industrial and the residential customer representatives, it's the small businesses that are left on the floor. But the other thing is that industrial customers really have the inside track on access and leverage with the utility. For a lot of good and maybe not so good reasons mixed together. And so historically, they've tended to get in place precedents, and precedents are really important in this arcane regulatory world that favor their business needs and design. And so that then turns into somewhat lower bills than maybe they would get if you had a build it from scratch fare system.
Okay. So help us understand where the actual costs, well, how it actually shows up. So this is happening and how costs are defined, right? Or the rates are ultimately designed from the beginning. So where does it really take shape?
Well, so rates are decided in what's called a rate case, and there's usually a regulator called a public service commission, or sometimes a utilities commission, or sometimes kind of an oddball name. Um, and the rates, the utility comes in and says, here's what our costs are, and here's how we propose to allocate those costs out to customers, and then here's the rates that we propose to charge to collect those costs. And so it's kind of that three-step process. And um, ideally, you have a group of committed people who will review those costs and say these costs are fair or they're not fair. And then you'll have probably the same group or a similar group of people who will look at the other two steps in the process as well. And in the end, the commission or whatever it's called, a board, will make a decision and approve that, and then that's what gets charged to customers. That's what happens for
Right.
the vast majority of customers. It's worth mentioning here that if you live in a region that has a municipal or a cooperative or some other public entity, the process is more of a single entity making that decision and not a regulator.
Right.
So it can be a little bit complex there. And then you can throw wrinkles into it where there's some costs that are under federal jurisdiction. And so those rates and those components of the rates get handled in yet another way. So it gets incredibly
Yeah.
complicated.
That's what I'm
And
saying. I mean, that
yeah,
was a great like overview of what happens with rate design. But rate design is design, right?
right.
And we're talking about large customers, we're talking about small businesses, we're talking about real people that are struggling right now, right? And how does that all come together in a rate design, right? So it's, is it all of those entities? I guess it depends on what's being proposed, right? But all of those
Right.
entities
So
are part of it.
I think what you're getting at is sort of what does it look like behind the closed doors, so to speak.
We're talking
And
under the hood today.
yeah, so essentially what will happen is the utility proposes it, and a lot of that information is public. And it's interesting, regulation, a lot of key information is confidential, and you have to sign agreements to get access to it. Rate cases typically are actually some of the most public proceedings. So if you have an
Okay.
interest in it, you can actually get a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of documents and read a lot of things and know a lot about what's going on. It's not easy. It's not easy. When I go into a new jurisdiction, it takes me at least a week or two to sort of figure my way around. Like, where are the things that I usually look for, and are they even on the
Okay.
record? Do I need to ask for them? Then the second thing that usually happens is people sort of come up with their positions. Then it usually goes to a settlement discussion. Regulators, in theory, would hear all the facts and make a wise and judicious decision. What they really like is when different parties, like you and me, negotiate and say, we've all looked at this and we all agree that this is the fair outcome. And then the regulators go, well, let me look at that really carefully. And then they say, okay, good. We don't have to decide anything. We're accepting the deal. So, and I don't mean to be so cynical about it. It's a somewhat useful process. But like I said, there's parties that have a long history and a lot of resources and a track record who tend to have the upper hand. And there's
Hmm.
parties who are newer to the process. They have to fight a lot harder to even get something in that settlement agreement.
Right. Okay. So we're in a new era here, right? You said the grid is aging, right? And we have data centers that have shown up.
Mm.
AI has taken over the world, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
we're entering this moment, right? And based on what you're seeing and how these, we just talked a little bit about cost dynamics, right? How they play out. How are you seeing this being played out now with just hyperscalers, right, and tech companies when it's a whole new load, large load on the grid?
Well, it's a mix. I'd say it's what I remember a football team that used to play under a scheme that they called controlled chaos. And I'd say that's about where we're at right now. There are a lot of rules of the road and a lot of structures that sort of guide people into certain patterns. And yet you've got this insanely large new customer group coming along in many
Right.
regions. I mean, literally, there are utilities that are forecasting to double their load over the next 5 or 10 years. Now, imagine if you're a business, just say you're a home contractor, and all of a sudden someone comes along to you and says, I'm going to buy, I know you're building 100 houses a year. I want to buy 100 houses a year from you. You are going to pay a lot of attention to that new
That's
customer,
right.
right? And the other customers are going to get less attention because you've only got so much attention as a business owner to go around.
Mm.
And so that is what is happening. There's a lot of focus on the needs and the interests of these very large customers. Set aside whether it's being done fairly or not, there is only so much attention in the world to go around, and it is being focused very heavily on these customers. And, we have a tradition and sort of a regulatory practice where everyone has sort of a right to service. It's known in the industry as an obligation to serve. So if I buy some property and want to build a house on it and I can get a permit, then I want to connect to the power line, I get service. There's no question. I don't have to go ask, and the utility decides, yeah, we like you. We're going to do business with you. So it's not like that contractor who might turn down a customer just because they don't want to do business with that person or company. But when you're a business or an individual and you want to get power, the expectation is the utility that has that service territory has an obligation to serve you.
Okay. So you mentioned, whether it's fair or not. So I want to talk a little bit about that because many of the large companies, I've been reading this and hearing about it, is that we'll pay full cost, we'll
Hmm.
pay our fair share. I know here in Colorado, there's a couple of rate cases happening. We had on one of the commissioners. Um, uh, didn't talk about the rate case, but did talk about what is um, what's on the plate right now. So when they say they'll pay full cost, right? This is where consumers, everyday people go, okay, I've heard that before. Like, will that really happen? So from your experience, how straightforward is that really in practice? And where do you see
It,
the biggest gaps between the claim and how the costs actually get assigned?
yeah, you said we had 2 hours, right?
Part one, part
It's
two, part three, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I will say, some of it is straightforward. There are regulators who are in very good faith trying to make this work. But it is complicated. Simply the definition of what is full cost is really hard to say.
Okay, right.
Um,
That alone.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you can imagine that someone would say, well, that would be the cost of a transmission line to connect the facility and maybe a power plant to power the facility, and you could add those numbers up, and that would be full cost. But the reality is no one uses a single power line. They share the whole system. They
Yeah.
depend on it. I could get into electrical engineering here, but essentially, without the power grid as a whole, the power line outside your house won't work. It just takes that whole system to make it work
Mm.
effectively and tightly. You can go off the grid, and there are large data centers that are proposing to go completely off the grid. They're going to build their own power plant. They're
I'm
going
hearing
to
that, like little
and
microgrids, right?
yeah, yeah, just something. And you go drive around the place and you won't see a single power line crossing the fence,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, yeah.
So that's one solution. Those businesses are now in the business of running a computer center and running a power system. And that is going to be a
Very
double challenge
interesting.
where they had one going in. So most of them would prefer to connect to that wire or to multiple wires coming into their facility and get that power from someone who already knows that business of being reliable. So that's the real challenge there, I think, is that you've got this scale of impact on the system.
Yeah. Any examples of this? The unit that's just powered by the company, right?
Yeah,
Happening.
so as someone who works on regulation, those facilities are not regulated. And so I don't really see them.
Ah,
I
right. So
read
it's
about
not
them
showing up there. They're
occasionally.
just doing it, right?
I read about them, but if you own, 1,000 acres of ranch land in Texas and you want to put and you've got a natural gas wellhead on your site, let's just say you could put a gas plant and a data center right there on that property, and you'd have to get an air permit for the gas plant, but you'd have it. And then the question would be, can you run it reliably? What are you going to do when you need to take that plant down for maintenance, et cetera? So
Yeah.
there's all
And
these
the impact on the
challenges.
community. I mean, if it's on, it's way out
Right.
on a ranch, but it's also there's sounds, there's
There's sound and all those things. Yeah.
yeah, that
So
happens.
so so you've got all those issues to deal with, but if you do that, then the world I live in, which is the electricity regulation world, not going to see any trace of that facility on that in that world. It just isn't going to come up.
Okay. Okay. So this is all in play, right? Decisions are being made because and conversations are being had that have never been had before. So
Yeah, I
and
mean,
that's why it's so
a really good example of that is one of the things people are asking, going back to your point about, what is fair. One of the things people are asking for is long-term contracts with these facilities. And historically, I would say 99% of the contracts between a utility and its customer, even what was considered to be a large customer, say 5 years ago,
okay.
were for 1 year, maybe 2 years. There might have been a scattering of 5 year contracts out there. But in general, the idea was if you're big enough that you're going to come in and sign up for a big connection to the grid, and you're going to have to pay for that immediate connection. So the
Right.
wire from your factory to the transmission line, you got to pay for that. And that's involves a lot of equipment and so forth. So if you've made that investment, the assumption is you're going to be around for a while. And
Right.
that worked fine for auto manufacturers and water treatment plants and just a whole
Mm.
host of large facilities, university campuses, you name it. There's lots of large customers out there, hospitals, go on and on that will have connections to the grid that are very large. They've paid for it, but they're on a year-to-year contract. The contract just
Okay.
says, here's how much power you're going to deliver to us. Here's how we're going to behave. And that's an important point because large customers can behave in ways with their electricity that can affect other customers. With my house, if I go flipping the breakers on and off nonstop downstairs, that's going to mess up my house, but it's not going to affect my next door neighbor. If
Hmm.
a hospital, and they're not going to do this, but if a hospital went and shut down all its power, then turned it all back on, and then shut it down again and turned it on back on, the utility is going to call them up and say, that is against your contract. You are behaving in a way that is causing us problems to run our system and help the
Uh-huh.
department store or the hotel next door have reliable service. So those are the kind of things that get written into these contracts, but they were always year to year or whatever. And now you've got literally facilities that are at the scale of the entire utility in a few cases, where you've
That's
got a
right.
single facility coming in that could double the demand. All of a sudden now they say, wait, we're going to build a bunch of equipment, transmission lines, generation plants. We're going to sign contracts, and we need you to sign up for more than a year. We need you to sign up for however many years. And the challenge, the thing that's becoming a little bit apparent to me
Mm.
is that many of these contracts tend to be for 8 to 15 years. That's where most of this is being done. Whereas the cost recovery, and this is a financial term that we use in
Right.
rates, the time over which a regulated utility is allowed to recover those costs and get paid by its customers is usually more like 25 to 40 years.
Right. So who
So you
pays that
that
gap?
later part, yeah.
Right.
If that customer goes away in 15 years, and they might well, I mean, we've got such a fast moving information technology world. It
Totally.
is very possible that the energy demands could go down as fast as they go up. And certainly we've seen that in some other industries over history where the industry came in, there was a huge demand for power, then the industry went away, and that power demand
Well, we
evaporated.
see with the coal plants that have gotten closed, right? And they built a long time
Right, that
ago, and
would be
then
on
now
the
they're
generation
stranded
side.
assets, right? And now who gets to pay for that?
But a great
So,
example of that is actually the oil and gas fields. So, which state was it? I think it was, we were discussing North Dakota. And North Dakota right now has some of the fastest growing load, and rates in North Dakota are actually going down because you've got all this load coming in from oil and gas production. Well, what's interesting is they had a lot of space on their lines to accommodate that, so they didn't have to build a lot of infrastructure.
uh-huh.
So when you've got new revenue coming in without adding a lot of costs,
There you go.
rates go down. Why was there all that space on that infrastructure? Because a decade or two
The
ago, you
space,
had a
right?
lot
The
of
gap.
oil and gas facilities that were built and ran and then shut down. So they then dumped those costs onto all the other customers. So this so-called
Hmm.
North Dakota miracle, or whatever people are calling it,
Well, it
is actually
started
an
off as a
echo
mistake and it became a miracle, right?
is an echo of some cost impacts that people
Yeah.
probably have forgotten or prefer to forget. So,
Okay. Very
that's
interesting.
yeah. So I mean, if these things come and go, and that can be a real problem for it. So that would be one place I would point to where we still aren't really haven't figured out how to get it right with these contracts and rate designs and tariffs, as they're called. That's a big area.
Yeah.
We could go through a longer list, but that's a good example for your listeners to sort of think about.
Okay. Okay. So we're talking about energy affordability. That this whole series really focuses on that, right? We started off with data that talked about what some of the utilities and what they're asking, like $35 billion, right, in rate hikes. Hope I got that right. It's in show one, and then on show two we had real people come on that are stressed on it, right,
Mhm.
on their bill that went up 40%. So from your perspective now, from a regulatory, and you're an engineer as well, so what does credible response to
Just
energy
so I don't
affordability?
overrepresent myself, I'm not an engineer. I'm a sort of economist side of the world policy
Okay, I got
expert.
that
So
wrong.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So, um, even better. Okay, economist. What does that credible response to energy affordability actually look like right now from your vantage point?
Well, so from my vantage point, it's not going to come as fast as people would like, and I don't have quick silver bullets, I'm afraid. I know that, and really what I've seen, there's one regulator, for example, that put a rate cap in. This was in Canada, and they had the ability to sort of step in and put a rate cap in, and it created an incentive for the utility to underinvest for a year or two until things were sorted out. And
Hmm.
that has then backfired on everyone, both the utility and the customers, in the sense that now things um, are behind that needed to get done. So that can be a real problem. So those quick fixes, I haven't found one.
Okay.
The things that I work on are more longer term investments in cost minimization. So making sure that large capital projects like new transmission lines or new power plants or renovated power plants are done with a high degree of attention to what is the lowest cost alternative that will solve the problem and what is the most cost effective way to contract for the assistance to do that work, and what are the ways that the utility can then manage that project to minimize risks or manage risks and minimize schedule delays and cost overruns. So that's one side of it. Another side is running the system, making good choices about fuel procurement and then which power plants run at which time and other kinds of operational
Right.
issues. So those kind of very in the weeds management, economics,
Mm,
engineering. It's a multidisciplinary field, and you need people with all of those disciplines put together to make it really work.
right. So, is there anything that you're working on right now that's got you excited, right? Or is maybe just um, even hopeful, let's say. Excited or hopeful? You pick.
Um, well, I think the boy, that's really I mean, I work on really so many things. It's sort of hard to pick out which one is your favorite child. But I will say that, just given today, I'll pick today. Earlier today, I was in a hearing. My client is the consumer advocate in Nova Scotia. And
Okay.
one of the practices that they have there that's very unusual is an annual review of capital costs. And I've been working in these proceedings now for about 7 years, and progressively the board has directed the utility to implement more and more effective measures to minimize costs in its capital spending. And I've seen the results in some areas of the utility be very positive. And it's kind of like, sort of like, cleaning your house. If you've got a really messy house, you've let things get out of hand, you kind of start with one room. You get it straightened up. Some of the mess goes into the next room. And then you go into that room and you straighten it up. So we've been kind of methodically going through all of the different things that the utility is doing with its capital spending, and gradually setting in place practices that we can review and make sure that they're implementing. And we're seeing that the costs are becoming more predictable. They're implementing the best practices in procurement and cost management in more cases, not universally yet, but it's getting better and better. And so, today I had identified some areas where we really hadn't had an effect yet, and said, all right, let's look at these areas. Let's try to make changes in these areas. And I'm hopeful that the board this year or next year will direct some actions in those areas.
All
So
right. More predictable, you said, right?
yes, more
Uh,
predictable, and really, when you put the utility on its toes like that, they still have an opportunity to earn money. It's not kind of going after their jugular. It's really saying, we think
yeah.
we hear you, that you believe that you're already doing everything you can. But when we ask you what you're doing, we're not getting sort of a comprehensive look. And a lot of times people fall into habits.
Mm,
And in the case of the utility industry, because it's monopoly oriented, you don't have a lot
right.
of change, like mergers and acquisitions and businesses that are shut down and new ones that are
Exactly.
started up. So things get entrenched. Practices, which is good and bad.
Mm,
Safety culture is a big thing in the utility industry, and it's taken decades for that to really take root. Well, now it's taken root. And so you see safety incidents in the utility industry way below what they were decades ago. We need to do the same thing for cost that we did for safety. Have cost minimization be almost job one, right after safety. And that's something that is just, it's utility by utility, department by department, process by process.
right. This is all happening all around the US and beyond, right? This is
Mhm.
not just
Yeah.
US focused.
I mean, some better than others, and some utilities, do have essentially regulatory capture. Their regulator sort of lets them do what they like, and that is a situation where you don't see these kinds of improvements happening. So it's not
Okay.
happening everywhere.
Okay. Um, so what in closing here today, what's giving you hope right now for in this, you've been in it for 2 decades, right?
Yeah.
And you've been in the regulatory proceedings, and they're different now, right? They might be the same, but there's also data coming in that's predictory, right? That we can see going forward. So what's giving you hope going
The
forward?
thing that the thing that I when basically that puts a smile on my face after I hear about it is really some of the new technologies that are coming forward. One of them is in the area of transmission system management. So you have a lot of what's called grid enhancing technologies or
Hmm.
advanced conductor materials, almost like superconductors, these advanced conductors that, so you can go in and you can take an existing transmission line, and with technology and new conductors, you can double the amount of power that's carried on that same set of towers, more or less. And so that's really exciting to see these new technologies
Nice.
that can really upgrade our grid at relatively low cost, but compared to, say, building a new transmission line in a new place where there hasn't been one before. Another great example is enhanced geothermal energy. That is an area where I think a lot of the oil and gas expertise is going to shift over to. And
Right.
there's more and more evidence that this enhanced geothermal energy is not one of these sort of news at nine stories that disappears after 5 years, but it's really growing in momentum. and it could literally provide a hundreds or thousands of gigawatts of power to the US, I would say within 10, maybe 15 years. And it complemented with
Mm.
solar and storage, I think would be our lowest cost energy future. And I'm not working directly on geothermal. I don't have any geothermal companies as clients. I'm not advertising for one by talking to you about it. I just think
Getting you
it's
excited
a,
though, right?
it's a perfect fit for what we need. It's a technology that can produce power in, it's most effective in the West, but there are lots of places in the East. I was just looking at a great new map out from the National Laboratory of the Rockies that shows where geothermal could build, and probably every county in the country is within 200 or 300 miles of a site that would be very good for this enhanced geothermal.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's really all over, and it's a very low impact. You can imagine like a power plant the size of a small city block being big enough to power that entire side of town.
Okay, so let me see if I
And with
got this right. The
Yeah,
geothermal, right? First of all, I remember even just let's say 5 to 10 years ago, it's a sliver. It was just like not really even on the map
yeah,
when we look at our energy. And now, every trade show you go to, any
mm,
magazine, you open up around this geothermal. And is it that and I might be wrong about this, but is it that the oil and gas industry and some spent right uh, sites actually can be converted right to geothermal, or are we talking new production and new digging,
it's really
right?
new.
Or
Yeah,
is
you're
it,
not
or
going to
is
be able
it
to take
both?
the same well hole and reuse it for geothermal. It's really just that the technology and the
Okay.
skills in the oil and gas industry, not all, but many of them transfer over
Oh, I
to
see.
geothermal. And once you get the well drilled and the basic hydraulic operations of the well worked out, the power plant that goes on top is a really basic power plant. It is not something that's complicated to build and maintain and operate. So
Oh,
it
I
is
see.
kind of, it's, other than the fact that we've got to build up the capacity to build lots of these. It's as close to a silver bullet as I can think of that's out there right now. So
Okay.
those are a couple of technologies that I think really give me hope. They're not going to help the guests on your previous episode with their power bill in the next few years. It's just not going to happen that quickly. But that would be my
How long does
answer to
it
your
take for
question.
one of these plants to erect? Like, for instance, natural gas is like 5 years, right? Nuclear too, it takes a while. Is this solar and wind a lot shorter, right? But then it's intermittent and we still need batteries.
Yeah.
So what are we
Um,
looking at with
I think
geothermal?
it's a little bit of wait and see to when they
Okay.
start building the 10th or 11th plant, then you'll have a better sense of that.
Okay.
But my guess is we're talking, I mean, I know that, a gas well can be drilled and put into production in a matter of months. So the same thing would generally go with the geothermal system, and it would be the power plant and the connection to the grid that would really be that would be where the time would come in. So
Okay.
it's not really drilling the well. I mean, I'm sure it's a big project to drill a mile, half a mile down into the soil or whatever, but it doesn't really take that long. Some of the other things are going to be more of a challenge.
All right. So technologies are getting you excited. New technologies that could lower costs, I heard you say, right? And new innovation
Yep.
for our grid, which
Yeah,
is so
I think a lot of the cost increases that are going right now, it's going to be it's the I mean the electric grid, I'm sure guests have told you this before, is the biggest machine in the world, the US electric grid. And if you think of it
all
as like a
right.
ship, it's very quick, it's very slow to turn.
That's right.
But once it turns to a new direction, it can move in that direction very effectively. And so
Okay.
I think it's going to take us a few years to get to that. I'm going to keep fighting for customers and my clients to get cleaner and cheaper power wherever I can. But it's going to take some time and some focus on things that are likely to get built quickly and safely. And that's one of the great things about geothermal compared to say nuclear is that it's going to be a lot quicker and safer to build in that kind of a time frame.
All right. Thank you, John.
You're so
Right.
welcome, Carolyn.
Yeah, so very interesting. We went off into technologies, which we usually don't, and I want to do a whole series around this. So geothermal, right, you got me excited about that. And what I'm taking away from this conversation is that energy affordability is not just about costs, right? It's about decisions, right, that are made, even that you might not even be part of, but it's also about innovation, right? Decisions on how we build, innovation about how we build, how we plan, and who ultimately pays. And thank you for being an advocate for the people, right? So that that it's a checks and balances here, right? In this whole movement that we're doing towards clean energy and a new grid, or an enhanced grid, I should say. So that's exactly why this series exists. To ask what credible responses, right? I think that's one of them, what it looks like in this moment. So thank you again for helping us understand a little bit under the hood too, that you've helped us so that we can get this right. And for our listeners, if this conversation enlightened you, it did for me, inspired you, or even riled you, right? Go ahead and subscribe to Just Power. It really, that one action keeps this show going. It really matters. So take a minute and just subscribe. And even if you liked what we talked about today, go ahead and make a comment. Because without you, these conversations do not reach the people who really need to hear them. So, as always, as I say, we are all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.